The Nile River, you see, was everything. It dictated life in ancient Egypt. Its annual flood brought fertile silt that allowed for agriculture where otherwise there would be desert. And it served as a highway, connecting communities and facilitating trade. We're focusing today on one particular community, Deir el-Medina, a village nestled within the Valley of the Kings. Between roughly 1570 and 1070 BC, this was home to skilled artisans, tomb builders, sculptors, painters, who labored for the pharaohs, constructing their elaborate resting places. But among these elite craftsmen were others whose work, while essential, often. Imagine a society where clothing wasn't simply discarded when soiled. Linen, being valuable and difficult to produce, was meticulously cleaned and reused. These individuals, men, women, even children, formed an integral part of the village's infrastructure. They were responsible for maintaining the cleanliness not only of their own families, but also of the artisans themselves, and by extension, contributing to the smooth operation of the royal tomb construction projects. The texts we have from Deir el-Medina, thousands of them on papyrus and ostraka, offer a rare glimpse into this often overlooked aspect of daily life. It's remarkable, really, how much detail survives about such seemingly mundane tasks. The texts also reveal something about their status within this society. While they were skilled laborers, contributing directly to royal projects, they weren't necessarily considered equal to other officials or priests. Records of disputes, for instance, and there were many, show that grievances often involved rations, work assignments, and even accusations of theft. These aren't the actions of a uniformly privileged class. Rather, they point to tensions within the village itself, reflecting hierarchies and inequalities present in broader Egyptian society. One particularly revealing set of documents concerns requests for leave, sometimes simply to attend to family matters, other times to grieve a loss. Text 10, as it's identified in scholarly catalogues, details a request for paternity leave. Imagine. It highlights the complexities of balancing work obligations with personal life, even within this tightly controlled environment. Beyond the formal records, fragments of letters and poems offer glimpses into their personal relationships, love songs, expressions of longing, anxieties about illness. These aren't grand pronouncements from kings or scribes, but intimate moments captured on scraps of papyrus. They remind us that these were individuals with hopes, fears, and affections much like our own, and the very fact that we have them, that someone felt compelled to record such personal thoughts, suggests a degree of literacy and leisure time within this working community. The village of Deir el-Medina, nestled within the Valley of the Kings, offers a remarkable window into daily life, a time capsule, as one scholar has described it. We've explored some aspects of that existence already, the love songs, the requests for paternity leave. But to understand how such a community could flourish, we need to look further back, to the very foundations upon which Egypt was built. Imagine a land fractured, divided into Upper and Lower Egypt, two distinct realms with their own rulers, customs, and even religious centers. That was the reality before King Narmer. The unification under Narmer, or possibly Menes, as he's sometimes known, is something of an enigma. The evidence is fragmented, largely symbolic, rather than a detailed narrative. But what we do have, palettes carved with scenes of conquest, inscriptions on pottery and stone vessels, suggests a deliberate effort to forge a unified identity. These aren't just records of military victory, they are declarations, visual pronouncements asserting the supremacy of one kingdom over another. We see Narmer depicted wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, a powerful image intended to convey his dominion. This unification wasn't simply about conquering territory. It was also about consolidating power, standardizing practices, and creating a centralized administration. And that shift had profound implications for everyone in Egyptian society, including those who would later find themselves laboring at Deir el-Medina. Before Narmer, local rulers likely controlled their own workforces. Tasks were assigned based on custom or personal obligation. But with the emergence of a unified kingdom, we begin to see signs of more organized labor. Projects undertaken on a scale previously unimaginable, like monumental temples and irrigation systems that required coordinated effort across vast distances. It's reasonable to assume that even seemingly mundane jobs, such as laundry, a task essential for maintaining clothing and linens for both the elite and the working classes, would have been impacted by this new centralized authority. It's likely that laundry tasks, previously managed within individual households or perhaps by small groups under local authority, now fell under some degree of centralized oversight as well. We don't have explicit records detailing how linen production and cleaning were organized at this early stage. The surviving texts from Deir el-Medina are much later, but it's reasonable to infer a shift towards more standardized practices across the kingdom. Perhaps larger workshops began to emerge, dedicated solely to laundering textiles for royal households or administrative centers. The scale of these operations would have depended on the availability of water and suitable locations for drying linens, factors that undoubtedly influenced settlement patterns as well. The Old Kingdom, roughly from 2686 to 2181 BC, witnessed an unprecedented concentration. It's a period often visualized through its monumental architecture. The pyramids rising from the desert sands, and those structures themselves speak volumes about the nature of Egyptian society at this time. Pharaohs weren't merely rulers, they were considered divine beings, intermediaries between the gods and the people. This belief underpinned their absolute authority, extending to every facet of life, including seemingly mundane tasks like laundry. The sheer scale of construction during the Old Kingdom, think of the Great Pyramid of Giza, demanded a vast workforce, not just skilled stonemasons, but also laborers for countless supporting roles. Linen was the primary textile. It clothed everyone from royalty to field workers. Maintaining such an enormous supply of linen required significant effort, growing flax, weaving cloth, and, crucially, keeping everything clean. While we lack detailed records specifically about laundry practices, it seems reasonable that centralized authority would have impacted even this aspect of daily life. Imagine the logistics. Providing clothing for thousands of pyramid builders alone would necessitate a constant cycle of washing, drying, and repair. It's likely that specialized workshops emerged to handle these tasks, perhaps operating under the availability of water, the Nile itself, naturally, but also access to canals and wells would have been paramount in determining where such workshops could be established, shaping settlement patterns across the kingdom. The workshops likely weren't grand, imposing structures, but rather more modest facilities clustered near water sources, perhaps simple mud brick buildings with open courtyards for drying. Imagine a space filled with vats for soaking linen, basins for scrubbing, and lines strung between walls to allow garments to air dry under the Egyptian sun. The scale of operation would have been considerable, providing even basic clothing for thousands of workers involved. While we lack explicit descriptions of these laundry workshops, the sheer volume of textiles in circulation suggests a formalized system. The texts recovered from Dia el Medina, centuries later but offering glimpses into similar societal structures, reveal details about rations and labor disputes, and those concerns surely extended to clothing maintenance as well. These records highlight that even seemingly minor aspects of daily life were subject to oversight and occasionally protest. It's plausible that overseers or scribes would have been responsible for tracking linen supplies, managing the workforce involved in laundry, and ensuring a consistent supply of clean garments. The linen laundry, as we've seen, was an operation of considerable scale. But beyond the mechanics of cleaning and repair, it's worth considering what underpinned this entire system, the beliefs that shaped ancient Egyptian life itself. Religion permeated daily existence, influencing everything from agriculture to architecture and certainly labor. At the heart of their worldview was Ma'at, a concept representing order, balance, and truth. It wasn't simply a moral code, but a cosmic principle sustaining the universe. Maintaining this harmony was paramount, and Egyptians believed that both the living and the dead had roles to play. The gods were intermediaries between humanity and the divine forces shaping their world. Ra, the sun god, embodied creation and renewal. His daily journey across the sky mirrored the cycle of life itself. Osiris, associated with the afterlife, judged souls and ensured order in the underworld. These beliefs manifested practically, influencing how people approached their work. The act of maintaining clothing, a necessity for practicality and status, could be seen as contributing to Ma'at. Cleanliness held symbolic significance. Purity was essential for approaching the gods and ensuring a favorable judgment after death. Consider those funerary models discovered in tombs like that of Ka and Merit at Deir el Medina. These miniature scenes depicted daily life farming, craft production, even linen weaving intended to provide sustenance and activity in the afterlife. It suggests an understanding that labor wasn't merely a means to survival, but a fundamental aspect of existence, continuing beyond this world. Were these laundry workers consciously formulating theological arguments? Perhaps not, but they certainly participated in a system where seemingly mundane tasks contributed to a larger purpose. The tomb of Ka and Merit provides some insight into how beliefs manifested practically, though we shouldn't assume everyone shared their level of. While elite families could afford miniature workshops in their tombs, what about those whose labor sustained them? Even for a laundry worker, cleaning linen might have been more than just removing dirt. It was an offering, contributing to Ma'at. The finest linen, reserved for the king or high officials, demanded meticulous care, a process that required respect. Perhaps those who worked with such materials felt connected to the divine through their craft. The discovery of Ka and Merit's tomb reveals much about daily life. It contained furniture, storage chests filled with belongings, clothing, tools, and food intended for use in the afterlife. These objects highlight how deeply interwoven religious belief was with even the most mundane tasks. The models found within tombs weren't simply representations, but symbolized journeys. Could a laundry worker mending sails or cleaning ropes have contemplated that same voyage? It's impossible to know for certain, yet it highlights this deep connection. The linen itself demanded careful handling, and those who worked with it likely felt connected to something larger than themselves through their craft. But consider the tools at their disposal, or rather the lack of them. Imagine trying to clean a coarse sailcloth without even soap. The very process of laundering was arduous, requiring significant physical effort. Yet within this seemingly simple task lay evidence of remarkable innovation. The Old Kingdom, roughly from 2686 to 2181 BC, witnessed advancements that profoundly shaped daily life and, yes, even the labor involved in something as commonplace as laundry. We often think of grand pyramids when we consider this era, but it was also a time of subtle yet transformative changes. The development of hieroglyphic writing, for example, wasn't solely about recording royal decrees. It facilitated record-keeping across all sectors of society. Imagine the logistical challenges of managing rations and supplies for workers. Without a system to track distribution, chaos would surely ensue. Similarly, the creation of a remarkably accurate 365-day calendar, a feat of astronomical observation, allowed for more precise planning of agricultural cycles and work schedules. This wasn't just about predicting floods. It meant organizing labor forces with greater efficiency. Texts from later periods, discovered at Deir el-Medina centuries after the Old Kingdom, reveal that workers sometimes requested paternity leave, a testament to evolving social structures made possible by increasingly sophisticated administrative systems. While we cannot know if such requests were common during the Old Kingdom itself, it speaks to the potential for greater individual agency within a structured society. These administrative efficiencies extended beyond simply tracking rations. They also influenced how labor itself was organized and perceived. The ability to record details, even seemingly minor ones, fostered a degree of specialization within the workforce. While many individuals likely performed multiple tasks, certain role scribes who managed inventories, overseers who coordinated teams became increasingly distinct. This isn't to suggest a rigid hierarchy akin to later periods. Rather, it reflects a growing complexity. Consider, too, the impact of the calendar on seasonal labor. The annual inundation of the Nile remained the defining event of Egyptian life. But with more precise knowledge of its timing, officials could better plan for planting and harvesting cycles. This meant that periods of intense activity, like the construction projects common during the Old Kingdom, could be scheduled to avoid the most disruptive flood seasons. It's reasonable to assume that laundry workers, like all laborers, benefited from this improved predictability. A more stable schedule allowed for greater planning in their own lives and reduced the likelihood of unexpected disruptions. The Old Kingdom presents a nuanced view of Egyptian society, extending beyond the familiar image of pharaohs and priests. Understanding the lives of laborers, those who built that world, reveals a different story than one of simple hierarchy. It's easy to envision them as a faceless mass, but their existence was shaped by complex social structures and economic realities. Consider the laundry worker. Their place within this system offers insight into how ancient Egyptian society functioned. The village of Deir el-Medina, though later in date than the Old Kingdom, provides a valuable glimpse into working people's lives, a window illuminating earlier periods. While texts from that settlement are centuries removed from our focus, they reveal patterns of organization and social interaction likely present much earlier. These villagers, primarily artisans and laborers involved in tomb construction, left behind thousands of written records, letters, census documents, even petitions for paternity leave, a remarkable legacy allowing us to hear their voices across the millennia. This abundance of evidence allows a degree of insight rarely afforded by other ancient societies. The social hierarchy wasn't rigid, it was layered. While officials and scribes held authority, laborers were not entirely powerless. They formed communities with internal structures and avenues for voicing grievances, as evidenced later at Deir el-Medina through strikes and petitions regarding rations. These individuals weren't simply cogs in a machine, they possessed agency within their defined roles. The very fact that we have records of disputes, requests for leave, and even expressions of affection among them suggests a degree of social mobility and interaction beyond what might be expected. Their work, providing clean linen for practical and ritual purposes, was valued within this intricate web of relationships. This valuation extended beyond mere sustenance. It encompassed social standing as well. While the elite enjoyed lavish estates and elaborate tombs requiring vast numbers of laborers, the skills of those who maintained their linen were undeniably vital. A well-dressed official signaled not only personal wealth, but also the efficiency and prosperity of the kingdom itself. Indeed, the quality of textiles reflected upon the pharaoh's reign, a sign of order and abundance. The act of laundering wasn't simply about cleanliness, it was an affirmation of status, both for those who possessed fine linen and those who cared for it. Evidence from Deir el-Medina suggests that skilled launderers might have been assigned to specific households, forming a kind of specialized service within the broader labor pool. This isn't to suggest they were privileged. Their work remained physically demanding, but it did afford them a degree of stability and recognition, uncommon for many laborers. The linen launderer's life was often one of relative stability, a degree of recognition for demanding work. But that shifted with the First Intermediate Period. The centralized authority underpinning Egyptian society fractured, creating competing local rulers and diminished royal power. A gradual erosion rippling through daily. The village of Deir el-Medina, our primary window into these lives, didn't yet exist during this era. However, patterns observed elsewhere reveal how instability affected laborers. Previously, rations and wages might have been distributed through a centralized system, ensuring some consistency even in hardship. Now, local governors or landowners often assumed those roles, prioritizing their own needs over universal well-being. Shortfalls became more frequent. Payments delayed. Imagine the anxiety when expected supplies simply didn't arrive. Texts from this period speak of these difficulties. While we lack laundry lists from the era itself, accounts of ration shortfalls and labor disputes offer a glimpse into challenges faced by those relying on regular compensation for their work. It wasn't that people stopped needing clean linen. Rather, the system supporting its care began to unravel. Did this mean launderers ceased working? Not entirely. Local elites still required fine garments. Temples needed ritual linens, but terms of service changed. Perhaps a shift toward direct payment in goods or labor obligations tied to local estates instead of royal coffers. The move towards local control also meant traditional avenues for redress. Appeals to the pharaoh's court, for instance, became less effective. Disputes over wages might be settled by a local governor whose interests didn't align with those of laborers. This doesn't suggest anarchy. Communities still functioned, and individuals likely sought resolution within their villages. But enforcement rested increasingly in hands not always accountable to broader societal norms. Even within a seemingly stable community like Deir el-Medina, where we have so many texts documenting daily life, the changing political landscape left its mark. Records of disputes brought before local officials, sometimes involving accusations of unfair treatment or withheld payments, illustrate this dynamic. These aren't indicative of widespread rebellion, but highlight the erosion of centralized authority and its impact on individual livelihoods. The period was marked by strikes, shortfalls in payments, and layoffs, a time when even the prosperity of the workmen diminished as Egypt weakened. The preceding centuries had been turbulent, marked by disunity and shifting power dynamics. But around 2100 BC, a new era dawned, the Middle Kingdom. Reunification brought stability, and with it, a renewed focus on centralized administration and cultural flourishing, a shift that subtly reshaped even the most mundane aspects of life. Consider, for instance, the work of those who kept Egypt clean, literally. Amongst the many roles necessary to sustain this burgeoning society was that of laundry worker. While we lack detailed accounts specifically about these individuals, their names rarely appear in surviving records. Their labor is nonetheless visible within the broader picture of Middle Kingdom organization. The village of Deir el-Medina, though later known for its tomb workers, offers a glimpse into this era's societal structure and how it influenced even seemingly minor tasks. This community, situated near what would become the Valley of the Kings, provides us with an extraordinary wealth of texts, letters, census records, legal documents that illuminate daily life. These weren't grand pronouncements from pharaohs or priests. They were the scraps of existence left behind by ordinary people. The Middle Kingdom saw a strengthening of centralized authority. While local communities still existed and functioned and disputes inevitably arose, the ability to enforce decisions became more. This meant that even those engaged in seemingly simple tasks like laundering clothing would find themselves operating within a framework governed by royal decree and administrative oversight. Rations were distributed with increasing regularity, though shortfalls did occur, as evidenced by records of complaints. These records also reveal something about the concerns that preoccupied individuals beyond simply securing their daily rations. Disputes over property, for instance, were common, and the methods of resolving them offer a fascinating glimpse into the legal landscape of the time. Formal courts existed, but villagers frequently sought recourse through local officials or even the oracle of the deified pharaoh Amenephis I, particularly in cases involving land ownership. It's striking to consider that disagreements, sometimes seemingly minor, were documented with such care and detail, a testament perhaps to the value placed on maintaining social order within these communities. Decisions often appeared situational, adjusted to the specifics of each case. It wasn't necessarily about adhering to precedent, but finding a resolution that satisfied all parties involved, or at least minimized further conflict. The texts from Deir el-Medina suggest a degree of flexibility in how disputes were handled. The texts from Deir el-Medina, that village of artisans and laborers nestled near the Valley of the Kings, offer a remarkable window into daily life, a glimpse beyond the monumental tombs themselves. We've explored their legal disputes, their family relationships, even the mundane realities of ration distribution and household repairs. But what about their beliefs? What role did religion play in the lives of these men and women who built the pharaoh's eternal resting places? The evidence suggests that while official state cults certainly existed, the worship of Amun-Ra, for example, it was personal piety that truly shaped the villagers' experience. The texts don't dwell extensively on those formal religious structures. Instead, they reveal a vibrant landscape of local practices and divine manifestations. It's striking to consider how much we learn about ancient Egyptian religion, not from grand temple inscriptions, but from these intimate records left by ordinary people. These weren't simply rote recitations of established dogma. The villagers clearly engaged with their faith in deeply personal ways, seeking guidance and solace through festivals, rituals, and sometimes they sought answers directly through the oracle of the deified pharaoh, Amenephis I. Imagine that. a dispute over property, leading you to consult the spirit of a deceased ruler. It speaks to the profound intertwining of religious belief and daily life in their world. The text suggests that these local deities were often linked to specific aspects of daily life, perhaps representing forces like fertility or protection from harm. We see evidence of offerings made to them, not grand displays within monumental temples, mind you, but smaller, more intimate acts performed in homes or at shrines erected near the village. These weren't necessarily exclusive practices. A family might simultaneously honor a local spirit and participate in broader state religious observances. It's fascinating how interwoven these different layers of belief became. And it wasn't just about formal rituals either. The villagers appear to have believed that divine power could be accessed through more informal means, like dreams, or even the pronouncements of individuals considered particularly attuned to the spiritual realm. This is where those letters to the dead become so revealing. They weren't simply expressions of grief. Sometimes they served as a conduit for seeking advice or intervention from deceased relatives and officials. The Oracle of Amenophis I-2 suggests this desire for direct contact with the divine, a way to navigate complex situations beyond the reach of ordinary courts. What does it say about their worldview that they believed a departed pharaoh could resolve a property dispute? The letters we've been examining offer glimpses into daily life, but they also hint at broader shifts happening within Egyptian society. The period known as the Second Intermediate Period, roughly from around 1650 to 1550 BC, wasn't a time of unified rule and prosperity. Instead, Egypt fractured. Different regions fell under the control of various local dynasties, often vying for power. This instability had ripple effects even in places like Deir el-Medina, where those laundry workers lived and labored. The most significant external influence during this era came from what we call the Hyksos, a people whose origins are still debated by scholars, but who arrived from somewhere in Western Asia. They established a kingdom in Lower Egypt, wielding chariot warfare and bronze technology that gave them a considerable military advantage. Now, Deir el-Medina was situated further south, within Upper Egypt, which remained largely outside direct Hyksos control. However, the broader political landscape did impact life there. The disruption of trade routes, the shifting alliances between local rulers, all these things affected the flow of resources and the stability of work projects. The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal a community grappling with this uncertainty. We see references to shortages in rations, including water, a constant concern for anyone living in an arid climate. And then there are those remarkable strikes, workers refusing to toil until their grievances were addressed. Imagine the audacity of that. It suggests a level of organization and assertiveness born from precarious circumstances, a workforce willing to challenge authority when their livelihoods were threatened. What does it say about the power dynamics at play when laborers feel emboldened enough to withhold their labor? The Hyksos presence also brought cultural exchange, though often unevenly. While we don't have direct evidence of Hyksos workers in Deir el-Medina itself, the introduction of new technologies and artistic motifs likely occurred through trade and contact with regions under Hyksos influence. Perhaps a weaver incorporated a foreign pattern into their cloth designs, or a tomb painter adopted a slightly different style. Subtle shifts that speak to a world in flux. And even the legal system seems to have been affected. The use of the Oracle of Amenophis for property disputes is an interesting development. suggesting a search for alternative avenues of justice when traditional courts might be perceived as unreliable or biased during this period of political fragmentation. The preceding centuries had been turbulent, marked by foreign rule and internal division. But around 1570 BC, a new era dawned for Egypt, the New Kingdom. This period profoundly reshaped the nation's destiny, transforming it from a vulnerable territory into a regional superpower. And that transformation rippled through every facet of Egyptian life, even impacting those who labored in relative obscurity at Deir el-Medina. The expansion began with military campaigns under pharaohs like Ahmose I, who expelled the Hyksos and reasserted Egyptian control over Nubia to the south and Canaan to the east. This wasn't simply about reclaiming lost territory, it was about establishing dominance. Control of these regions brought access to vital resources, gold from Nubia, timber and trade routes from Lebanon, resources that fueled further military endeavors and enriched the royal coffers. Pharaohs of this era, particularly Thutmose III, were ambitious builders and conquerors, their reigns marked by extensive construction projects and campaigns against neighboring kingdoms. And it was these rulers who commissioned elaborate tombs carved into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, requiring a skilled workforce centered at Deir el-Medina. The scale of these royal tombs demanded unprecedented organization and expertise. The village itself grew. More families were brought in to support the artisans, sculptors, and laborers needed for this monumental undertaking. While we can't know precisely what each individual felt about their role, a carpenter shaping cedar or a stonecutter chiseling endlessly, the evidence suggests that these workers were increasingly valued, receiving rations and experiencing periods of relative prosperity. But this stability wasn't permanent. It unfolded over decades as royal power diminished and internal strife grew. Texts from Deir el-Medina reveal a gradual erosion of those benefits. Ostensibly letters to the deceased, but also records of complaints and petitions, speak of delayed rations, reduced supplies of grain and beer, and even instances where work itself was suspended due to lack of materials or instructions. One record details a dispute over linen, precisely the kind our laundry worker would have been processing, highlighting how seemingly minor shortages impacted daily life. It's tempting to imagine frustration building within the community. After all, these were individuals who had known relative prosperity and security. But we can only infer such feelings from their grievances. What is clear is that the stability which had characterized much of the New Kingdom began to fray. The letters and records from Deir el-Medina offer glimpses into daily life, but they also reveal something more profound about the worldview of these workers. While their immediate concerns revolved around rations and labor conditions, and those were significant enough to spark protests, a deeper framework shaped their understanding of their place in the world: religion. The New Kingdom, spanning centuries, saw a complex evolution of religious beliefs, and Deir el-Medina provides an unusual window into how these played out within a working community. Central to this belief system was Amun-Ra, a syncretic deity formed from the union of Amun, originally a local Theban god, and Ra, the sun god. By the New Kingdom, Amun-Ra had become the supreme state god, his worship intertwined with royal power. It wasn't simply about piety. It was intrinsically linked to the stability and prosperity of Egypt itself. And that's where the pharaoh came in. The ruler wasn't just a king, he was considered a divine intermediary between the gods and the people. He performed rituals, built temples like those dedicated to Amun-Ra at Karnak, and ensured Ma'at, cosmic order prevailed. How did this translate for someone like our laundry worker? The texts from Deir el-Medina suggest that while grand state cults were important, personal piety flourished alongside them. This wasn't a matter of choosing one over the other. Rather, it was about navigating a layered religious landscape. Disputes weren't always settled through formal courts sometimes. Villagers consulted the oracle of the deified pharaoh Amenophis I for resolution, particularly when property was involved. It suggests an expectation that even in death, the pharaoh retained influence and could offer guidance. This expectation of continued influence from deceased pharaohs, seeing them as sources of guidance even beyond their earthly reign, highlights a fascinating aspect of New Kingdom religious life. It wasn't simply about grand temples or elaborate rituals performed by priests. It was woven into the fabric of daily existence, informing how people resolved disputes and understood their place. The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal that while the official cults centered on Amun-Ra were undeniably important funding for those very temples, certainly impacted the workers' livelihoods. Personal devotion took many forms. One example involves appeals to the oracle of Amenophis I, as we've seen, but other deities also featured prominently in individual lives. While the larger state religion emphasized Amun-Ra's power and connection to kingship, smaller household shrines dedicated to local gods or ancestors were common. These weren't necessarily contradictory beliefs. They existed alongside one another, providing a spectrum of spiritual engagement for individuals with. The villagers appear to have felt comfortable navigating this complexity, drawing upon different avenues of faith, depending on their needs and circumstances. The texts from Deir el-Medina, that village of artisans and laborers near the Valley of the Kings, offer a remarkable window into daily life, a glimpse alongside monumental undertakings like royal tomb construction. What allowed this community to function so effectively? The answer lies in part within the technological advancements characterizing Egypt's New Kingdom period. Consider the sheer volume of texts we possess from Deir el-Medina, thousands of papyri and ostraka documenting rations, legal. This reflects a broader shift in literacy and administrative practices. The development of hieratic script, a simplified cursive form of hieroglyphs, made record-keeping far more efficient. Imagine managing hundreds of workers using only elaborate carvings. It would have been nearly impossible. Hieratic facilitated communication between officials and workers, creating an archive of activities. The very construction projects that brought these people together demanded increasingly sophisticated engineering techniques. Plans for royal tombs survive, detailing every stage from inception to completion, revealing a surprising understanding of geology, structural mechanics, and surveying. These skills likely permeated village life, influencing everything from household construction to water management. The increased availability of writing materials, papyrus itself meant more people could participate in record-keeping. While literacy remained a privilege, its reach extended beyond the scribal class. Imagine needing to account for quantities of linen, track repairs, or simply communicate between workgroups. Written notes became invaluable tools. And with greater literacy, we see personal inscriptions on ostraka, sometimes playful messages, sometimes simple communications, suggesting a growing sense of individual identity. Subtle shifts also. While physically demanding tasks remained, new tools and techniques perhaps improved. Levers or wedges for moving stones increased efficiency. A more literate workforce was better equipped to understand instructions and adapt to changing circumstances. Observations about materials and methods were documented and shared, fostering incremental improvement over time. The linen itself, piled high and waiting for washing, speaks volumes about daily life at Deir el-Medina. We've discussed how literacy blossomed here, but that wasn't solely a matter of scribes copying grand pronouncements. It meant meticulous record-keeping, inventories of materials like this very linen, and the ability. And who was responsible for managing all of this? Often it fell to women. The texts recovered from Deir el-Medina offer glimpses into lives rarely documented elsewhere. We find private letters, love charms, even a census record. What's truly remarkable is what these fragments reveal about the relative autonomy some women enjoyed. There are instances recorded where women were independent enough to dispose of property and navigate unwanted suitors, situations that suggest a degree of agency not always assumed in ancient societies. It's easy to imagine them overseeing the laundering process, perhaps directing teams of workers, negotiating for supplies, or even the sheer volume of linen needing cleaning. The sheets, tunics, loincloths would have required significant organization and oversight. One text even references a request for paternity leave, an extraordinary detail that hints at the complexities of family life and perhaps some protections afforded to working mothers. While we can't definitively say these women held positions of power in the formal sense, their involvement in economic activities, managing resources, resolving conflicts suggests they occupied spaces with considerable influence within their households and communities. It's tempting to imagine these women as matriarchs, wielding considerable authority, and while that might have been true in some instances, it's also important to remember the constraints of the texts do not present a uniformly empowered female population. We see evidence of societal expectations shaping behavior and limiting choices, even for those who demonstrated remarkable independence. For example, disputes over property often involved male relatives asserting claims or challenging decisions made by women. This suggests that while some women could independently manage assets, their actions were still subject to scrutiny and potential intervention from men within the family structure. The very act of requesting paternity leave, remarkable as it is, implies a process requiring justification and approval. Someone had to grant that request. Furthermore, the nature of the work itself likely reinforced hierarchies. While women oversaw aspects of the laundering operation, they were still working within an established system overseen by male officials responsible for provisioning the royal household. The linen itself was ultimately destined for the palace or temple places, largely controlled by men. It's a complex picture, one where agency and constraint coexisted, shaping the daily lives of these women in nuanced ways. The linen washing we've been following, a rhythmic labor shared by women and men, didn't occur within a vacuum. The Third Intermediate Period, roughly from 1070 to 664 BC, saw Egypt fractured politically. Imagine a kingdom not unified under a single pharaoh with absolute authority, but splintered into regions often vying for power. This wasn't sudden. The decline of centralized control had been building, particularly after the 20th dynasty. As royal power weakened, so too did the systems that supported it, including those providing linen to the palace and temples. The village of Deir el-Medina offers a remarkable window into this era. It was home to artisans and laborers who constructed tombs in the Valley of the Kings. While their work continued, circumstances surrounding it changed considerably. Text from Deir el-Medina letters on papyrus, inscriptions on ostraca reveal growing instability, records of strikes, shortages including water, even layoffs. People once reliably employed now faced uncertainty about their livelihoods. These texts also highlight a willingness to challenge authority. Requests for paternity leave suggest negotiation previously unheard of. We find evidence of women asserting themselves, disposing of property, and rejecting suitors, a testament to shifting social dynamics in the absence of strong centralized control. But these actions were often born from necessity, from precarity. How did a community maintain order when its support system was crumbling? Disputes that might once have been resolved through established channels now played out within the village itself. McDowell's descriptions reveal arguments over property, accusations of theft, even instances of what we might recognize as domestic violence, not necessarily new occurrences, but with narrowed avenues for redress. The Oracle of Amenophis I served as a local arbiter, suggesting a shift away from centralized justice. Villagers increasingly relied on their own devices, negotiation, mediation, enduring grievances. The texts reveal that the village inhabitants had many of the same concerns found in modern life. And while we possess sufficient archaeological data and these thousands of texts recording daily activities, remnants of life are easily subject to decay, giving us a biased view of ancient Egypt. The decline of prosperity towards the end of the 20th dynasty is illustrated by records of strikes, shortfalls in payments, and layoffs. The decline of prosperity towards the end of the 20th dynasty is illustrated by records of strikes, shortfalls in payments, and layoffs. But this wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a period of significant change, marked by increasing foreign influence on Egyptian life. The village of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans and laborers who built the royal tombs, provides us with an unusually detailed glimpse into these shifting times. We have thousands of texts, letters, census records, even love charms, that illuminate daily routines alongside moments of disruption. Imagine a laundry worker in this era. Their work wouldn't be dramatically different from what came before. Linen still needed cleaning and preparation for both the royal household and the villagers themselves. But the very fabric of their society was being rewoven. The late period saw waves of foreign powers, Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, vying for control of Egypt. Each brought its own customs, technologies, and administrative structures. This resulted in a blending of cultures, sometimes harmonious, often tense. For our laundry worker, this might mean encountering new dyes imported from elsewhere, or learning techniques adapted from foreign artisans. Perhaps they'd observe different styles of dress becoming fashionable among the elite, reflecting these external influences. The texts reveal that even seemingly mundane aspects of life were touched by these changes. Healthcare, household maintenance, weather, all were viewed through a lens shaped by this interaction with outside forces. And while we possess sufficient archaeological data, and these thousands of texts recording daily activities, remnants of life are easily subject to decay, giving us a biased view of ancient Egypt. The texts from Deir el-Medina, for instance, reveal that even labor practices adapted to these shifting circumstances. While laundry work itself remained constant, linens still needed cleaning. There's evidence of changes in how tasks were organized and compensated. During periods of foreign rule, rations might be adjusted, or new forms of payment introduced alongside traditional ones like grain or beer. Imagine a worker accustomed to receiving barley suddenly finding themselves paid partially in silver coins issued by the Persian administration. It's not necessarily about a fundamental shift in their daily routine, but rather an alteration in the economic context surrounding that work. Furthermore, some texts suggest shifts in the types of fabrics being processed, finer textiles arriving from abroad, perhaps requiring different cleaning methods or dyes. This would necessitate adjustments to techniques and potentially even specialized tools within the laundry workshops. It's a subtle evolution, certainly, but one reflecting the broader currents reshaping Egyptian society.
The Nile River, of course, dominates any discussion of ancient Egypt. It wasn't simply a river, it was the very foundation upon which their civilization rested. Imagine a landscape almost entirely desert, vast stretches of sand and rock, and then picture this vibrant ribbon of water carving its way through, bringing life to everything around it. That's what the Nile represented. Its annual floods weren't destructive events to be feared, but rather predictable cycles that deposited fertile silt across the land, enriching the soil for agriculture. Without those floods, there would have been no surplus grain, and without a surplus of grain, well, there wouldn't be an ancient Egyptian society as we know it. And this agricultural abundance had profound implications for everyone, including someone like our laundry worker. The river wasn't just about feeding people, it was the primary artery for transportation. Goods, textiles, food, building materials moved along the Nile on boats of all sizes. Consider that most roads were little more than dusty tracks unsuitable for anything beyond foot travel or pack animals. So, if a fine linen garment needed to be cleaned and returned to its owner who lived miles away, it was almost certainly going to be transported by boat. The river dictated not only how things moved, but also the very structure of settlements. Villages and workshops clustered along its banks for easy access to this vital waterway. Even the water used in our workers' daily tasks, the soaking, scrubbing, rinsing, all came directly from the Nile itself. The river's influence extended even to the food our laundry worker ate, of course. While some provisions were brought in from elsewhere, much of their diet would have been based on what could be grown or caught nearby. Fish from the Nile itself being a particularly important source of protein. And that reliance on the river wasn't always straightforward. Fluctuations in its level and quality directly impacted harvests and fishing yields. Texts recovered from Deir el-Medina, a village near the Valley of the Kings, reveal complaints about insufficient rations, sometimes linked to problems with water supply. Imagine relying on a single source for everything: drinking, washing clothes, irrigating crops, and then facing shortages. Beyond sustenance, the river also shaped their understanding of time itself. The annual flood cycle dictated agricultural rhythms, and those cycles were meticulously observed and recorded. Calendars were developed to predict these events, marking them with religious festivals and adjusting work schedules accordingly. It's a fascinating thought, a life so intrinsically bound to the rise and fall of water. The river's rhythm dictated nearly everything, and that included how people worked. The annual flood wasn't just about bringing fertile silt, it was a signal to begin planting, a marker for when fields could be prepared and crops sown. Imagine the precision needed, anticipating the water level, coordinating labor across an entire community, all based on observation and experience passed down through generations. And that rhythm profoundly shaped the lives of those who labored, even someone like a laundry worker. The agricultural system itself was complex. While Egypt's climate is arid, the Nile provided the essential ingredient: water. Irrigation canals were dug to distribute this precious resource across fields of wheat, barley, and flax, the very fiber that would become linen for clothing. These weren't simple ditches, they required constant maintenance Texts from Deir el-Medina reveal a surprising amount about these efforts. Complaints about water shortages, requests for repairs, even disputes over access to irrigation channels. It's easy to overlook the sheer effort involved in simply keeping the fields watered. The planting season was followed by months of tending, weeding, protecting crops from pests, and preparing for harvest. And that harvest cycle directly influenced labor demands elsewhere. When agricultural hands were needed in the fields, fewer might be available for other tasks. This meant a laundry worker's workload could fluctuate depending on the time of year. Perhaps more clothes needing washing during periods of relative inactivity in the fields, or less when everyone was engaged in bringing in the harvest. The needs of the royal household and those of the temple priests would still demand linen, of course, but the availability of labor to process it might be affected. The impact of these agricultural cycles extended beyond simply dictating labor availability. They shaped the very rhythm of life for everyone, including those washing linen. For instance, texts from Deir el-Medina occasionally mention concerns about the quality of flax harvests. A poor harvest meant coarser cloth, which in turn might require more intensive cleaning or re-washing. And while the Nile's annual flood was generally celebrated, unexpected variations could create hardship. A late flood might delay planting and disrupt established schedules, potentially leading to backlogs in linen production and increased demands on laundry workers later in the year. The sheer volume of work associated with processing flax, from harvesting and scutching to spinning and weaving, meant that any disruption at one stage rippled through the entire system. It's a reminder that even seemingly simple tasks like washing clothes were deeply interwoven with the broader agricultural landscape. The texts from Deir el-Medina, a village of workers who built royal tombs centuries ago, offer an unusual glimpse into daily life. We often think about ancient Egypt in terms of pharaohs and pyramids, monumental achievements that dominate the landscape even today. But what was it like for those who built them? What did they eat? How did they organize their days? And what were their concerns? Among the most essential tasks within this community was keeping clothing clean, a surprisingly revealing window into their world. The work of laundry wasn't glamorous. Linen, made from flax, formed the basis of almost every garment, bedding item, and household textile, and linen required regular cleaning to remove dirt, oils, and sweat. The sheer volume needing attention was considerable. Imagine a community where nearly everyone wore linen, from the youngest child to the most senior craftsman. Someone had to wash it all. These individuals, the laundry workers, were vital for maintaining hygiene and social order within Deir el-Medina. Their duties likely involved soaking garments in water, often drawn from wells or channels fed by the Nile. Then they would scrub them against stones or wooden surfaces, using ashes as a form of soap. The texts mention concerns about rations, including water, suggesting that access to sufficient quantities was sometimes an issue. After scrubbing, clothes were rinsed repeatedly and then laid out on rocks or raised platforms to dry in the sun. It's a laborious process demanding considerable physical effort. Maintaining linen also demanded attention to detail. Supervisors monitored the quality of the washing, likely ensuring a level of cleanliness deemed acceptable for both work clothes and finer garments intended for personal use. Disputes arose occasionally. Imagine the frustration if your best tunic came back looking worse than when it went out. The process wasn't simply about removing dirt, it was also about preserving the fabric itself.
Repeated harsh scrubbing could damage the linen fibers, so workers needed to exercise care and judgment. Some texts suggest that certain individuals specialized in particular types of laundry, perhaps those dealing with delicate fabrics or garments belonging to high-ranking officials, required extra skill.
While ashes served as a common cleaning agent, other substances were likely employed too. The precise recipes remain elusive, but might have included plant extracts or even animal fats for particularly stubborn stains. These efforts contributed directly to the overall image and functioning of Deir el-Medina as a prosperous community. The linen tunic, freshly laundered, might seem unremarkable to us now. But consider its significance. It was a vital garment representing status and hygiene within ancient Egyptian society, and someone had to clean it. While we've explored the mechanics of that cleaning process, the ashes the plant extracts, it's worth pausing to think about who performed this labor and where they stood in the broader social order. The workers at Deir el-Medina, those responsible for constructing and maintaining the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, formed a unique community. Archaeological evidence reveals a village meticulously planned, with houses, workshops, and even tombs clustered together. These weren't slaves. They were skilled, laborers, stonemasons, sculptors, painters, and crucially, laundry workers among them. The texts recovered from Deir el-Medina offer an unprecedented glimpse into their lives, revealing details about family relationships, and these documents show that while valued for their skills, laborers occupied a specific place within the hierarchy of ancient Egypt. The Old Kingdom saw a rigid social structure. Think pyramids, layers upon layers of authority. At the apex was the pharaoh, then priests, nobles, scribes, and finally those who toiled: farmers, artisans, and yes, laundry workers. The New Kingdom, while exhibiting some shifts in power dynamics, still maintained this tiered system. While laborers like our linen scrubbers weren't enslaved, their freedom was circumscribed by economic necessity and social expectation. They received rations, grain, beer, sometimes meat, but these were often subject to shortfall, as evidenced by the texts from Deir el-Medina. And while some level of legal recourse existed, disputes were frequently handled through informal channels or reliance on local courts, a system that could be unpredictable. This tiered system wasn't immutable, however. The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal nuances within that structure. While a stonemason might have held higher status than a laundry worker, their skills more visibly contributing to the grandeur of royal tombs, the community itself fostered interdependence. A pharaoh's tomb couldn't be built without clean linen, after all, and occasionally individuals could rise through the ranks. Literacy, for instance, was a valuable skill that transcended occupational boundaries and offered avenues for advancement within the village administration, or even as scribes assisting overseers. The letters to the dead, those poignant messages left on ostraca flakes of limestone, reveal anxieties about social standing, but also demonstrate a degree of fluidity. A worker might express concern over rations or complain about a supervisor's actions, yet simultaneously acknowledge their reliance on the system for survival. These texts show that while formal hierarchies existed, personal relationships and informal networks played a crucial role in daily life, sometimes blurring those lines. The linen itself, of course, was precious. It wasn't simply a matter of aesthetics. Clean clothing played a vital role in health and religious observance within ancient Egyptian society. We know from archaeological finds that garments were often quite simple: loincloths for men, sheath dresses for women, but the sheer volume needed for daily life meant constant laundering was essential. And that's where our laundry workers came in. The texts recovered from Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans and laborers who built royal tombs, reveal just how interwoven cleanliness was with nearly every aspect of their lives. These aren't grand pronouncements from the pharaoh. They are the everyday concerns documented on papyrus scraps and flakes of limestone, ostraca, left behind by ordinary people. Shortfalls in rations weren't just about food. Sometimes it meant a lack of oil for lamps or detergent to clean clothes. Imagine that. Your ability to maintain basic hygiene directly tied to the efficiency of the state's distribution system.
Beyond practical considerations, cleanliness held deep religious significance. Egyptians believed purity was essential for connecting with the gods and ensuring safe passage into the afterlife. Ritual bathing was common, and clothing played a symbolic role in these ceremonies. Think about it. If you were preparing to offer prayers or participate in a funerary rite, would you present yourself in soiled garments? The answer clearly would have been no. And so maintaining clean linen became an act of devotion, a tangible expression of respect for the divine order. It's not surprising then that those tasked with this labor, our laundry workers, held a position of quiet importance within the community. This emphasis on cleanliness extended beyond personal hygiene, influencing how food was prepared and stored as well. While we don't have detailed recipes, imagine that. The archaeological record reveals storage jars carefully sealed with mud to prevent contamination. And ostraca sometimes mention inspections of grain stores, suggesting a concern for quality control that went hand in hand with purity. It wasn't simply about avoiding spoilage, it was about maintaining the integrity of offerings destined for both humans. The laundry workers themselves played a vital role in this broader system. Beyond just removing dirt, their labor ensured linen remained suitable for ritual use. They would have been familiar with different cleaning methods, soaking in natron solutions to remove stains, beating garments against stones, and likely understood the symbolic importance of their work. While we don't know if they received special recognition or privileges, it's reasonable to assume that those who diligently maintained this standard of cleanliness were valued members of the community, contributing directly to its spiritual well-being and physical health. The linen itself, of course, was precious. It wasn't simply a matter of aesthetics. These were garments destined for ritual use, and their condition directly reflected on the piety of those who presented them. But keeping that linen clean required considerable effort, and that work fell to specialists. Laundry workers within the community. What tools did they have at their disposal? And how did they approach this essential task? The evidence suggests a surprisingly practical toolkit. We don't find elaborate contraptions. Instead, the methods relied on readily available materials. Stones were crucial, not just for building structures, but also for beating garments to dislodge dirt and grime. Think of it as a rudimentary form of scrubbing. Water was naturally essential, though its source wasn't always convenient or plentiful. The village of Deir el-Medina, where we have the most detailed insights into daily life, relied on what water they could access, sometimes requiring considerable effort to transport. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture found in Egypt's desert regions, played another vital role. It acted as a cleaning agent and bleaching substance, helping to remove stubborn stains and brighten the linen's fibers. Imagine soaking garments in this solution. It would have been quite laborious, requiring careful monitoring of concentration and time. Beyond these basics, simple wooden tools likely assisted with wringing out excess water. perhaps even rudimentary frames for stretching and drying the fabric. It's a far cry from modern washing machines, isn't it? The wooden frames likely served not just to stretch the fabric taut for drying, but also to help prevent shrinkage. Linen is notoriously prone to that, you see, and while natron provided bleaching power, achieving a truly brilliant white was difficult. Most garments would have retained a slightly off-white or cream hue.
The color itself could be altered, of course, through dyeing. Evidence suggests the use of plant-based dyes were common madder root for reds and pinks, indigo for blues, and woad for another shade of blue, though its precise application remains somewhat unclear. These weren't applied casually. Achieving evenness required skill and careful attention to detail. Imagine trying to dye a large bolt of linen without creating streaks or blotches. The process itself would have involved simmering the fabric in vats containing the dye solution, another labor-intensive step, demanding considerable heat and constant monitoring. The linen, as we've discussed, demanded considerable labor to produce, but once woven, it still wasn't ready for wear. It needed cleaning, a task that, like so many others in ancient Egypt, revolved around water. And not just any water, its availability and management were deeply intertwined with daily life itself. Imagine a village nestled along the Nile. Water was everywhere, of course, the very source of their existence. But accessing it for laundry wasn't simply a matter of dipping fabric into the river. The Nile's currents could damage delicate linen, and sediment would leave an unsightly residue. Instead, communities relied on canals and basins, carefully engineered to provide controlled access to water. These weren't grand projects necessarily. Often they were smaller-scale arrangements, ponds dug near homes or communal washing areas within the village. Deir el-Medina, a settlement of artisans and laborers working on royal tombs, provides us with some insight into these routines through its extensive record-keeping. The process itself would have begun with soaking the garments to loosen dirt. Then came the scrubbing, likely using abrasive materials like sand or natron, which we touched upon earlier. Following that, rinsing was crucial. Multiple rinses, in fact, to remove all traces of soap and grit. The sheer volume of water required for these steps is staggering when you consider the size of a household's linen supply robes, tunics, loincloths, bedding. It's easy to take clean water for granted, isn't it? But for an ancient Egyptian laundry worker, it was a precious resource. The canals themselves required upkeep, of course, clearing silt and repairing any breaches. This wasn't solely the responsibility of specialized laborers. Villagers likely contributed to these tasks as part of their communal obligations. And beyond the immediate needs of laundry, water underpinned nearly every aspect of life in ancient Egypt. Agriculture depended on it entirely, naturally, but consider also its use in brewing beer, a staple food and beverage, or in preparing countless other meals. Even religious rituals demanded significant quantities of clean water for purification and offerings. The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal that disputes sometimes arose over access to this vital resource. Arguments about diverting water flow or accusations of unfair distribution weren't uncommon. One can imagine the tension when a drought threatened the carefully managed system, impacting not just linen cleaning. It wasn't simply an environmental concern. It was deeply intertwined with social order and economic stability. The water that sustained life in ancient Egypt wasn't just for drinking or irrigating fields, it played a crucial role in religious practice too. Purification was central to Egyptian beliefs, both personal and communal.
requiring significant quantities of clean water. Think about the rituals surrounding temple offerings, or even simpler acts like cleansing oneself before prayer. These weren't merely symbolic gestures, they were vital components of maintaining harmony between humans and the divine.
And those who worked in Deir el-Medina, the village of artisans and laborers building royal tombs, were deeply embedded within this system. Texts recovered from that site offer a rare glimpse into how religious observance intertwined with daily life for ordinary people. While much is known about ancient Egyptian religion through grand state cult ceremonies performed by priests, these documents reveal something different: personal piety, everyday expressions of faith practiced within a working-class community. The villagers' connection to their gods wasn't solely mediated through official channels. They had their own ways of seeking divine favor and resolving disputes, sometimes invoking. It seems even seemingly mundane tasks like laundry were touched by religious significance. While we don't have specific texts detailing a ritual cleansing of linen itself, it's reasonable to assume that the process was approached with a degree of reverence. After all, clean linen wasn't just about hygiene, it was essential for clothing priests and officials performing sacred duties, and in a society where purity was so highly valued, even those responsible for providing those garments would have understood their role within this broader spiritual framework. It's likely these workers incorporated rituals into their daily routines, not necessarily elaborate ceremonies, but small acts intended to invoke divine protection or ensure a favorable outcome. The texts from Deir el-Medina occasionally mention appeals to deities associated with purification and renewal, such as Bez, the protector of households and childbirth, who also warded off evil spirits. While we don't see specific instructions for linen workers in this regard, it's plausible they might have offered small libations or prayers before beginning their work, seeking blessings for clean garments destined for sacred purposes. The very act of carefully sorting soiled materials, preparing them for washing, could itself be imbued with a sense of reverence, a recognition that these textiles were destined for something beyond mere practicality. Indeed, the importance placed on cleanliness extended to the spiritual realm. Maintaining order and purity in one's surroundings was seen as essential for harmony within both the household and the wider community. The meticulousness with which linen was handled, its careful sorting and preparation for washing, it wasn't simply about cleanliness, it spoke to a deeper understanding of order within the cosmos. And that order, as we've explored, was intrinsically linked to ideas surrounding death and the afterlife. For ancient Egyptians, existence didn't end with physical cessation. Rather, it transitioned into another realm, one requiring careful preparation and continued provision. The texts from Deir el-Medina, those remarkable records of daily life left by the workers who built the royal tombs, offer glimpses into this connection. While we don't find explicit instructions for laundry workers detailing rituals related to the afterlife, their labor undeniably contributed to practices that supported it. Clean linen was essential for funerary rites, for wrapping mummies, for shrouds, and for furnishing the deceased's tomb. Think of the sheer volume needed. A single mummy might require hundreds of yards of fine linen. The act of laundering these textiles wasn't merely a practical task. It was an integral part of ensuring that the departed would be properly equipped for their journey. The purity of the garments, the absence of any lingering impurity, all contributed to the deceased's successful transition and continued well-being in the next world. It's reasonable to imagine that those responsible for this vital work felt a sense of purpose extending beyond the immediate needs of the living. They were actively participating in a process that secured immortality. It's likely that the very act of laundering these linens, performed with such meticulous care, carried an implicit spiritual significance for those involved. The texts from Deir el-Medina don't explicitly state this connection, but we can infer it from the broader cultural context. Consider how purity itself was a central tenet in Egyptian religious belief. Ritual cleansing and purification were essential components of many ceremonies. And what could be more purifying than clean linen? Perhaps those who labored at the washing pools understood their work as contributing to something larger, ensuring not just physical cleanliness, but also spiritual readiness for both the deceased and the community itself. The repetitive nature of the task might even have lent itself to meditative practices, a way to focus the mind on the sacredness of the process. The texts from Deir el-Medina offer glimpses into daily life, and among those routines we find the labor of laundry workers. While their work might seem mundane compared to tomb construction, it was an essential component of household function, a function that extended beyond a single family's needs. The village itself comprised numerous households, each with its own demands for clean linen. Imagine a typical dwelling in Deir el-Medina. Several rooms clustered around a central courtyard. Within those spaces, the laundry worker would have had their designated area, often near a water source. These weren't grand workshops, rather, they were simple spaces adapted to the task at hand. Multiple workers likely collaborated in larger households, while smaller families might have relied on a single individual or incorporated laundry duties into other roles within the family structure. The scale of linen production was considerable. Garments weren't simply worn and discarded. They were valuable commodities needing constant care. Often this work fell to women, although men could also be involved. The texts reveal a complex web of relationships within these households. Servants assisting with tasks, family members sharing responsibilities, the laundry worker fitting into an intricate social hierarchy. It's not always clear from the records precisely who owned or controlled these workers, whether they were slaves, free laborers paid in rations, or simply family members fulfilling obligations, but their presence is undeniable. Descriptions within letters and other documents suggest a pragmatic arrangement of domestic spaces to facilitate laundry work. One letter mentions needing to move linen to avoid the dust, hinting at an awareness of environmental factors impacting cleaning. This implies workers might have sought areas with better ventilation or protection from the elements, perhaps near doorways or under shaded structures. Ostraca, flakes of limestone used for writing, found in and around these domestic areas, underscore their role as workspaces. These fragments often contain lists of items needing cleaning, notes on tasks completed, or even simple sketches related to laundry processes. A worker jotting down a reminder to soak a particular garment, perhaps, or detailing the amount of detergent needed. And what about children? It's reasonable to assume they would have assisted with some aspects of laundry, gathering water or helping to spread linen out to dry, though the extent of their involvement remains largely undocumented. The ostraca from Deir el-Medina, those flakes of limestone used for writing, offer a glimpse into daily routines we might otherwise miss. Lists of garments needing cleaning, reminders about soaking linen. These weren't grand pronouncements or royal decrees, but the practical record-keeping of someone earning their living through labor. And that's what we want to consider now.
the economic value placed on laundry work in ancient Egypt.
It wasn't a profession celebrated in monumental inscriptions, certainly, yet it was essential. Linen clothing was ubiquitous, from the simplest tunic worn by a field worker to the elaborate pleated garments of officials. Everyone needed clean clothes, and that meant someone had to wash them. The texts we have reveal that laundry work wasn't solely the domain of women, although they likely performed much of it. Men also participated, and in Deir el-Medina, the village of artisans and laborers who built royal tombs, some were specifically designated as laundrymen. We know this from census records and other administrative documents preserved on papyrus and ostraka. The wages paid to these workers provide a fascinating window into the economy of the time. While precise figures can be difficult to translate directly into modern currency, what was the equivalent value of a ration of grain, after all? We know that laundry work was compensated alongside other essential tasks like carpentry or stone cutting. Shortfalls in payments are even documented. One text records a grievance about delayed wages for those involved in cleaning royal linen. This suggests that timely payment wasn't always guaranteed, and that these workers had the right to voice their concerns, a surprising detail when considering the hierarchical nature of ancient Egyptian society. It prompts us to consider, what does it say about a society that recognizes the value of clean clothing enough to pay for its upkeep? This compensation, of course, varied depending on the skill required and the perceived importance of the task. A skilled carpenter might earn more than a laundry worker, but even seemingly minor roles contributed to the overall functioning of the community. The text from Deir el-Medina also reveals something about how these wages were distributed within families. While we can't definitively say who received payment, was it the individual worker or their household head? Some records suggest that earnings were pooled and shared, contributing to a family's overall ration entitlement. This highlights an interconnectedness between labor and domestic life. Clean clothing wasn't just about personal hygiene, but also about maintaining social standing and fulfilling obligations within the family unit. And it reinforces the idea that even seemingly mundane tasks like laundry played a vital role in supporting entire households. The texts from Deir el-Medina, that village of workers constructing royal tombs, offer a remarkable glimpse into daily life, a view often obscured by the decay of time and the focus on monumental architecture. We've explored how labor was interwoven with family obligations. Now, let's consider how these individuals interacted within their community. It wasn't an isolated existence. Despite the demanding nature of their work, the village itself seems to have been a tightly knit place. The archaeological record reveals plans of typical houses and tombs, offering a sense of shared space and experience. And it's through the surviving papyri and ostraka, fragments of writing on readily available materials like pottery shards, that we begin to hear their voices. These aren't grand pronouncements or official decrees, they are letters, charms, census records, the detritus of everyday communication. One finds references to healthcare concerns, water shortages, even the weather itself. It seems these villagers worried about things remarkably familiar to us today. Chapter 1 of McDowell's Village Life highlights private letters and love charms, offering a window into personal relationships. We also see records that touch on sensitive topics, domestic violence, and requests for paternity leave, demonstrating a complexity within their social fabric.
And perhaps most intriguingly, some texts reveal women who exercised considerable independence, disposing of property and navigating unwanted suitors. It prompts one to wonder, how different were the dynamics between.
But what did these interactions look like day to day? The texts suggest that laundry workers weren't entirely isolated from other trade scribes, stonecutters, even those involved in tomb construction itself. While their labor was essential for maintaining clothing and linen supplies within the community, it also placed them at a unique intersection of social life. McDowell's work highlights census records which reveal how families were organized and assigned tasks. These documents sometimes list laundry workers alongside other artisans. It's not always clear whether this indicates direct collaboration or simply shared responsibility for communal upkeep. Nevertheless, the very act of collecting soiled linen from various households would have necessitated frequent contact with a wide range of villagers. Imagine the conversations that might have arisen during those exchanges, perhaps a quick comment on the weather, an inquiry about a child's health, or even a request for assistance with another chore. These small moments, repeated countless times, likely fostered a sense of familiarity and interdependence within the village. And while we don't possess detailed accounts of these casual encounters, the very existence of letters sent to laundry workers, requests for specific services, or expressions of gratitude, demonstrates that they were recognized. The linen laundry of Deir el-Medina, as we've seen, was more than just a chore. It was an essential service underpinning daily life, and that importance extended beyond the immediate needs of the villagers themselves. Religious festivals were vital to ancient Egypt's spiritual and communal well-being, demanding vast quantities of clean linen for ritual garments, temple furnishings, and countless other uses. While we don't have detailed accounts of laundry workers participating in these celebrations, their labor was undeniably woven into them. Consider the scale of such events. Temples weren't simply buildings. They were vibrant centers of community life hosting processions, offerings, and elaborate. These required a constant supply of fresh linen, priests' robes, banners carried in procession, cloths for sacred objects, all needed to be spotless and ready. The laundry workers played a crucial supporting role, ensuring these displays of piety were visually pristine. They would have been tasked with cleaning linens specifically used for the festivals, likely working at an accelerated pace to meet increased demand. The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal that even mundane aspects of daily life intersected with religious observance. While most information concerns personal piety and local practices, it's reasonable to infer laundry workers would have been involved in preparing linens for these. Maintaining temple furnishings, a responsibility often shared amongst the community, likely fell under their purview at some point. Imagine the sheer volume of linen required to outfit an entire priestly retinue. It's not unreasonable to suggest they might even have received rations or other forms of compensation for this extra effort, though direct proof remains elusive. It's plausible that some laundry workers were involved in festivals beyond simply cleaning linens, perhaps assisting with textile arrangement or participating in smaller rituals connected to preparations. The texts don't offer explicit details on such participation, but they do reveal a pervasive sense of interconnectedness between work and rations were sometimes distributed as part of festival celebrations, and those supporting these events, including the laundry workers, might have received additional provisions. Ensuring the cleanliness and availability of ritual objects could be seen as a form of devotional service itself.
Meticulous attention to detail was valued in ancient Egyptian practice. Even seemingly minor tasks contributed to the overall harmony and efficacy of ceremonies. It's difficult to say precisely what their roles entailed, but it seems reasonable to assume they were integrated into the broader communal effort surrounding these significant occasions. The texts from Deir el-Medina, that village of workers constructing royal tombs, reveal a great deal about daily life, more than we might expect, given how easily remnants of everyday existence decay. We're fortunate to have thousands of papyrus fragments and ostraca recording activities alongside the archaeological remains. It paints a vivid picture, allowing us to glimpse not just their work, but also their concerns. And among those concerns was cleanliness. While much attention has been paid to the grand rituals surrounding royal burials, the practicalities of daily life in Deir el-Medina, including maintaining hygiene, were equally vital for the community's well-being. Laundry wasn't just about aesthetics. It was intrinsically linked to health and disease prevention. Imagine a settlement housing hundreds of people engaged in physically demanding labor, often in close quarters. The potential for illness would have been significant. The texts directly mention shortages of water, which is telling when you consider its importance not only for drinking, but also for washing. We know that clothing was laundered. The very lists detailing provisions included items specifically designated for cleaning.
While we don't possess detailed instructions on how this laundry occurred, whether it involved soap-like substances or simply beating garments against stones in the river, the fact that it happened at all speaks to a recognized need. It's reasonable to assume that regular washing helped mitigate the spread of skin conditions and other ailments common in densely populated areas, particularly among those engaged in arduous physical work. The texts also reveal anxieties about food shortages, but perhaps less immediately apparent is how these disruptions would have impacted hygiene. A lack of rations meant a reduction in resources available for washing clothes and bodies. Consider, too, that many workers were involved in quarrying and tomb construction, tasks which undoubtedly coated them in dust and debris. While we can't definitively state the precise methods used to clean themselves or their garments, it's reasonable to infer that periods of scarcity would have led to compromises. Perhaps clothing was worn longer between washes, or bodies less frequently scrubbed. Such a situation wouldn't necessarily lead to widespread disease. The community likely possessed some level of immunity and traditional remedies, but it certainly increased the risk. The very fact these shortages are documented suggests they were a recurring concern, and with them, an implicit threat to overall health. The texts from Deir el-Medina, a village of workers constructing royal tombs, offer an unusual glimpse into daily life, a perspective often obscured by grand narratives focused on pharaohs or tomb decoration. Among these villagers, we find evidence of something seemingly mundane: laundry. And that task, as it turns out, was intrinsically linked to how textiles were produced and maintained throughout society. The care of fabric wasn't simply about removing dirt. It involved preserving dyes and ensuring garments lasted. Textile production itself demanded a chain of labor, from cultivating flax or sheep's wool, through spinning and weaving, to dyeing and laundry represented a crucial final stage in that process. Imagine the vibrant colors adorning these clothes. Reds derived from madder root, blues from indigo, yellows from saffron. Each dye was precious, representing an investment of time and resources. Washing too harshly could fade those hues, diminishing the value of both the fabric and the dyes themselves.
These practical considerations were paramount even in a community dedicated to monumental projects like tombs. Shortfalls in rations, and we know from records they did occur, meant less food, but also fewer resources for washing clothes and bodies. This wasn't necessarily catastrophic. Communities likely possessed traditional remedies and some level of immunity.
Still, it highlights a recurring concern: how to balance labor demands with basic needs like hygiene and clothing maintenance. The texts reveal details about dye application as well. While saffron provided that vibrant yellow, its expense meant it wasn't always available. Records indicate substitutions were sometimes made with other, less costly pigments, though the resulting shades would inevitably differ. Imagine the frustration of a weaver attempting to match a previous batch. Beyond color, laundry workers also prepared fabrics for dyeing, sometimes scouring them for even dye penetration, and at other times treating fibers to make them more receptive. The substances used are often unclear. Some papyri mention plant extracts, but details remain scant. What is evident is that this wasn't purely mechanical work. Expertise was required, a practiced eye and hand to judge the fabric's condition and anticipate how it would respond. This suggests a degree of specialization within the laundry workforce itself. Some individuals likely became quite skilled in these preparatory tasks, passing their knowledge down through generations. The texts from Deir el-Medina, a village of workers constructing royal tombs centuries ago, offer glimpses into daily life that are surprisingly detailed. We've discussed how laundry workers prepared fabrics for dyeing, but their role extended far beyond that initial stage. They were integral to the maintenance and longevity of clothing within both households and the wider community. The tasks themselves would have been physically demanding. Washing involved soaking garments in water, likely drawn from the Nile or nearby wells, followed by scrubbing with a rough material. Some evidence suggests the use of alkaline substances, perhaps derived from plant ashes, to help break down dirt and grease. Drying was then crucial. Clothes were spread out on rooftops or rocks to bake under the Egyptian sun. This wasn't simply about removing moisture, however. The intensity of the sunlight could also affect colors and textures, requiring careful monitoring by experienced workers. Beyond regular cleaning, laundry workers also undertook repairs. Tiers would be mended with needle and thread. Linen was the most common fabric, and worn areas might be patched or reinforced. These weren't grand alterations, rather practical fixes to extend the life of a garment. Imagine the skill required to seamlessly blend a patch into an existing weave. The texts reveal that these individuals were not merely performing menial labor, but possessed a degree of craftsmanship. The skill involved wasn't limited to simple mending either. Evidence suggests that laundry workers sometimes reshaped garments, perhaps adjusting a tunic's length or altering sleeves, though these were likely minor modifications rather than wholesale redesigns. It seems they possessed a working knowledge of how linen behaved under stress and manipulation. The texts from Deir el-Medina offer glimpses into the sheer volume of clothing that needed constant attention. Imagine the workload for those responsible. Beyond simply cleaning, drying, and repairing, laundry workers also played a role in managing inventories. Records indicate that they were tasked with tracking individual items, noting who owned what, and when repairs or This suggests an element of responsibility extending beyond mere manual labor. It's fascinating to consider how such meticulous record-keeping contributed to the overall organization within both households and larger institutions like the royal workshops. The linen garments produced at Deir el-Medina weren't simply cleaned and repaired.
They were often integral to ritual practices, a connection woven into their work. We might think of laundry as purely mundane, a necessary task, but for these artisans, it held deeper significance. Many textiles destined for temples or royal ceremonies required meticulous preparation beyond simple washing.
The texts from Deir el-Medina reveal surprising detail about this process. Garments were prepared not just for daily use, but also for festivals and purification rites. Imagine the care taken to ensure cloths were free of any imperfection, a stain, a loose thread, for they would be presented to deities or used in sacred rituals. Cleanliness wasn't enough. The linen had to appear pure, reflecting reverence due to the divine. The worker's role extended beyond cleaning. Some garments likely required special treatments, perhaps involving specific herbs or cleansing agents, to ensure their suitability for religious use. While the precise methods remain elusive, the importance of this preparatory work is clear from the records. These were offerings in a tangible form. Did those performing this ritualistic laundering feel a sense of responsibility beyond simply fulfilling a task? Perhaps some felt connected to something larger than their immediate duties, but we can also appreciate that their actions maintained the cosmic order as understood within Egyptian society. For instance, records detail procedures for cleansing linen intended for festivals honoring deities like Hathor or Ammon. These weren't merely about removing dirt. They involved a deliberate sequence of washing and drying, sometimes followed by treatments with plant extracts, though the nature of these botanical additions remains unclear. Understanding why certain herbs or methods were favored presents ongoing challenges for researchers. The meticulousness extended to dyes as well. Certain colors held symbolic significance and required careful preparation to ensure they wouldn't bleed or fade during ritual use. Imagine the skill involved in achieving a specific shade of blue intended to represent the heavens, knowing that even slight variations could be considered inappropriate. The texts suggest this wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about ensuring visual representation aligned with religious beliefs. Any deviation from established protocols would likely have been cause for concern. The meticulous care given to clothing, the washing, drying, and dyeing we've already touched upon. But it's worth considering what this labor meant within the broader structure of ancient Egyptian society. The individuals performing these tasks weren't simply fulfilling a practical need. Their work reflected and reinforced social hierarchies. While we often picture grand temples and pharaohs, daily life for many revolved around more mundane activities and even something as seemingly simple as cleaning clothes could reveal subtle distinctions in status. The village of Deir el-Medina, where many of these texts originate, housed the artisans and laborers who built and decorated royal tombs. This wasn't a population of slaves. They were skilled workers, often receiving rations and benefits. Yet even within this relatively privileged group, there was stratification. The texts reveal disputes over rations water being a particularly contentious issue and requests for paternity leave, suggesting anxieties about economic security that would have varied by family status. It's likely those who performed the most physically demanding tasks, like laundry, occupied a lower. Imagine a scenario. A skilled stonemason might entrust his tunic to a laundress, while a scribe overseeing the tomb's decoration could afford a household servant to handle such chores. The act of delegation itself underscores these differences. Furthermore, legal texts from Deir el-Medina show how disputes were handled, sometimes through local courts, sometimes by appealing to the vizier's office, and occasionally even consulting an oracle dedicated to the deified pharaoh, Amenephis I.
These avenues for redress weren't equally accessible to everyone. Those with less social standing likely faced greater obstacles in pursuing their claims.
The legal texts also reveal something about the kinds of disputes that arose, and by extension, the social dynamics at play. While disagreements over rations are frequently documented, and understandably so given their importance for survival, there were other conflicts too. These ranged from accusations of theft to claims of assault, demonstrating a spectrum of interpersonal tensions within the community. Interestingly, the methods used to resolve these disputes highlight the layered nature of authority. As noted previously, villagers could appeal to local courts, the vizier's office, or even consult the oracle dedicated to Amenophis, particularly in matters concerning property. This suggests that while a formal legal structure existed, it wasn't always perceived as impartial, and alternative avenues for redress were sought. The very act of choosing which authority to approach likely reflected one's social standing and perceived likelihood of success. Those with greater influence might have felt more comfortable appealing directly to the vizier, whereas others may have been limited to local arbitration. The village of Deir el-Medina, nestled within the Valley of the Kings, offers a glimpse into daily life in ancient Egypt. While pyramids and tombs often dominate our image of this period, it's the remnants of ordinary existence that truly illuminate it, and laundry held a surprisingly significant place. It wasn't glamorous work, certainly, but an essential one, woven into domestic servitude within these households. The workers at Deir el-Medina weren't solely tomb builders. They were part of a complex social structure where labor was divided and specialized. Laundry occupied a vital role in that division. Texts recovered from the site reveal individuals tasked with washing linen garments, standard attire for most Egyptians, and maintaining textiles within wealthier households. Imagine the volume: tunics, loincloths, shawls, bedding, all requiring regular cleaning and repair. These tasks weren't solitary. Laundry workers formed part of a larger household staff alongside cooks, brewers, and other servants. The text suggests these individuals were employed by families or overseers within the village, fulfilling a function much like modern domestic workers. While detailed records of living conditions or wages are scarce, the fact that laundry is documented alongside rations indicates its importance in maintaining order. Did these workers interact directly with their employers, or were they managed by a steward? The answers remain elusive. Evidence suggests a hierarchical structure within households, placing laundry workers firmly within domestic servitude. One might imagine constant toil under watchful eyes, but the texts suggest a more nuanced reality. While subject to authority and expectations, evidence indicates some interaction between staff and household members. Letters from Deir el-Medina archives reveal children assisting with tasks like sorting or spreading garments, perhaps as part of their education within the domestic sphere. It's not carefree play. Labor was still expected, but it hints at integration into daily rhythms. Moreover, this implies some responsibility for procuring those materials, suggesting a degree of autonomy within a structured system. Did this level of responsibility extend to other aspects of their lives? The objects found within tombs, particularly those of Ka and Merit at Theban Tomb 8, offer a remarkable glimpse into daily life. And among these items are tools directly related to clothing care. Linen was central. It formed most garments, spun from flax grown along the Nile. While the finest linen was reserved for royalty, even common individuals required clean clothes, necessitating someone to manage that task. We know laundry workers existed because of equipment found within tombs: washing basins, soapwort, and fuller's earth, all essential for cleaning textiles. The role of these workers extended beyond simply scrubbing garments. They were part of a larger economic system. The provision of supplies like soapwort suggests some degree of responsibility in procurement, hinting at autonomy within the household structure. Maintaining clothing for an entire household, perhaps dozens of people, required a dedicated effort, and that effort had value. While we lack precise wage records, it's reasonable to assume these workers received compensation, whether in food rations or other goods, directly support.
Their labor also indirectly supported the broader workforce. Clean clothing was essential for all laborers, from farmers tending fields to artisans crafting tools, ensuring productivity and preventing illness. A healthy workforce was vital to the Old Kingdom's prosperity. The act of maintaining these garments, repairing tiers, replacing fasteners, would have required skill, potentially leading to specialized roles within the laundry staff. It's a quiet contribution, often overlooked in narratives about pharaohs and pyramids, but essential nonetheless. The provision of linen itself speaks to this interconnectedness.
While finer qualities were reserved for the elite, as evidenced by finds like those from Ka and Meret's tomb, the production of coarser linens still required a substantial workforce, from flax cultivation to spinning and weaving. Models found in tombs depicting workshops engaged in these activities offer a glimpse into the scale of this operation. They weren't isolated craftspeople, but part of a network supporting not only the royal household, but also the wider population. Even farmers needed clothing, and their families required clean garments for daily life. The laundry workers' contribution extended beyond maintaining wardrobes of the powerful. It sustained the entire social fabric.
The sheer volume of textiles processed suggests some degree of organization within the laundry staff itself. While we don't have detailed inventories, it seems likely that individuals specialized in particular tasks, perhaps some focused on washing delicate fabrics while others handled coarser materials or repairs. The discovery of tools used for linen production alongside those for cleaning reinforces this idea of specialization and skill. It's a vital element within the Old Kingdom economy, one where even seemingly mundane tasks like laundry played an essential role in supporting both daily life and monumental construction.
The discovery of Ka and Meret's tomb at Deir el-Medina offers a glimpse into daily life during the New Kingdom, roughly spanning from 1500 to 1070 BCE. Among the over 400 items found within, furniture, chests filled with belongings, food stores, were textiles requiring constant upkeep. This wasn't simply about maintaining wardrobes, it was essential for sustaining a complex society where clean clothing signified status and played a role in religious observance. We don't have detailed records specifically outlining their roles, but the sheer volume of textiles processed suggests a dedicated workforce.
It seems likely individuals specialized, perhaps some focused on delicate fabrics like linen, while others handled coarser materials or repairs. The presence of tools used for both linen production and cleaning reinforces this idea, suggesting a cluster of skills within the broader textile economy. These workers weren't isolated. They were integrated into a larger economic system. Ka himself supervised artisans decorating royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, meaning he would have had access to resources and personnel to manage these tasks. The goods found in his tomb demonstrate that even those involved in seemingly mundane activities.
The tomb itself provides clues. Hundreds of objects were discovered, including finished garments,
linen dresses, kilts and tools associated with textile production, spindles for spinning flax, looms for weaving, and basins likely used for washing and dyeing. These weren't scattered amongst other possessions. They appear grouped together, suggesting a dedicated area within their home related to textile work. While we don't have explicit titles like laundry worker, the presence of these tools alongside evidence of linen production strongly implies specialized labor. It seems plausible that some individuals were responsible for cleaning and maintaining clothing, not just for KHA and Merit themselves, but potentially for others in the village as well. The scale of textile use: fine linen, reserved for royalty, coarser materials for everyday wear, would have necessitated a significant workforce. And it's likely this work wasn't solely performed within households. Larger workshops or communal facilities might have existed to handle particularly large volumes. The organization of labor in Deir el-Medina itself was complex, with artisans grouped into teams and overseen by officials. It stands to reason that laundry workers would have been integrated into this system, perhaps receiving rations or other forms of compensation for their services. One can imagine a hierarchy even within the workforce, those skilled at removing stains from delicate fabrics commanding higher status than those tasked with scrubbing coarser materials. The objects found within tombs, particularly those of Ka and Merit at Theban Tomb 8, offer a remarkable glimpse into daily life, and reveal its connection to beliefs about what lay beyond death. Among the over 400 items discovered, there were clothing, tools, furniture, even food intended for their continued use in the afterlife. It's striking, isn't it, how much effort was invested in equipping these individuals for a journey we can only imagine.
And within that collection of belongings, garments held particular significance. Linen, painstakingly spun from flax, formed the basis of most Egyptian clothing. The finest grades were reserved for royalty, while coarser materials served everyday needs, a clear indication of social hierarchy even in dress. Now, consider the labor involved. Cultivating the flax, spinning it into thread, weaving that thread into cloth, and then cutting and sewing the garments themselves. This wasn't a solitary endeavor. It required a workforce, and laundry workers would have been vital to maintaining these textiles. Imagine the sheer volume of linen needing cleaning after a day's use or preparation.
The discovery of wigs belonging to Merit herself within her tomb highlights this connection. Clothing, both worn in life and prepared for death, was an integral part of their possessions. And it's reasonable to assume that those skilled at removing stains from delicate fabrics would have commanded a higher status than those tasked with scrubbing coarser materials. Even amongst laborers, there were distinctions. The tomb of Ka and Merit, for instance, contains several models depicting linen production. Small figures shown spinning flax, weaving cloth, and even folding finished garments. These weren't simply decorative, they were intended to magically recreate these activities in their afterlife existence. It speaks volumes about the importance of textiles, doesn't it? And while we often focus on the grander funerary objects, the sarcophagi, the mask sit was the everyday items like linen that truly represented a person's life and status. The sheer number of garments found within TT8 suggests an ongoing need for clean clothing, both in life and beyond. It's also worth noting that these models weren't just about production. They often showed workers receiving rations, bread, beer, even onions, demonstrating the interconnectedness of labor and sustenance.
Those involved in textile creation were clearly vital to the household economy, and their skills would have been highly valued both within Deir el-Medina and potentially beyond. For those who could prepare fine linen for funerary use might have commanded a premium. The linen we've been discussing, the tunics, the shrouds, didn't simply appear clean and ready for use. Someone had to wash it, and that someone was a laundry worker, an occupation seemingly mundane, yet deeply intertwined with the fabric of ancient Egyptian society. We tend to focus on monumental architecture or elaborate tombs, but consider this. Maintaining order wasn't just about grand displays of power. It also involved ensuring basic hygiene and public health. Within Deir el-Medina, as elsewhere in Egypt, cleanliness was a reflection of social standing and religious purity. Imagine the sheer volume of linen required for a community engaged in such demanding work as tomb construction garments, worn by artisans, priests, scribes, even children. These textiles would quickly become soiled with dust, sweat, and grime. The task of laundering them fell to individuals whose labor, while often overlooked, played a crucial role in the village. While we don't have specific titles for laundry workers as such, texts from Deir el-Medina reveal their presence through ration lists and mentions within household accounts. Their work was essential. Without it, disease could easily spread, disrupting productivity and threatening social stability. The process itself would have been physically demanding. Linen garments were likely washed in the Nile River or nearby pools, using readily available materials like natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, for cleaning. The sun's heat served as a natural disinfectant and dryer. It's reasonable to assume that this work was often performed by women, although specific details remain scarce. The texts offer glimpses into daily life, but rarely provide exhaustive descriptions of individual roles. What we do know is that their labor contributed to an environment where disease transmission could be minimized, ensuring a healthier workforce and a more stable community, a quiet contribution to the larger order of things. Beyond simply providing clean garments, this labor also served as an indirect form of social control. Disputes over linen quality or accusations of improper laundering likely occurred. While these aren't extensively documented, they're very possible. Imagine, perhaps, a disagreement about stains, a subtle assertion of status and adherence to communal standards. The process itself, particularly the drying phase under the sun, would have created opportunities for observation and informal social interaction within the village. Women working together near the riverbanks might share news or relay instructions from household heads, reinforcing existing hierarchies while simultaneously fostering a sense of shared responsibility. And it's worth considering that the availability of clean linen itself could have been tied to one's position within the community. Those performing essential tasks, like tomb construction, perhaps receiving. The linen itself, freshly laundered and sun-dried, wasn't simply about cleanliness. It represented a degree of status within the village, a visible marker of one's role in this complex society. And while we often picture these laundry workers as solely focused on removing dirt and grime, their position afforded them something more, a unique vantage point for observing the flow of people and goods through Deir el-Medina. Consider that linen wasn't produced locally, it was imported, primarily from the Nile Delta and beyond. Traders arrived regularly, bringing bolts of cloth alongside other essential supplies like grain and oil. These weren't fleeting visits, these were established routes, vital for sustaining a community dedicated to royal burials. And who handled those textiles upon arrival? The laundry workers. They received the raw materials, assessed their quality, and prepared them for distribution within the village. This meant direct interaction with merchants from different regions, perhaps even foreign lands. Imagine a young woman tasked with sorting through a shipment of fine linen intended for the overseer's household. She might overhear snippets of conversation in languages she doesn't fully understand, learn about distant markets and trade practices simply by observing the interactions between merchants. Perhaps she notices a new weaving technique or dye used on some fabric's information that could later be shared with others within the village, subtly influencing local textile production or even fashion. It's not an exaggeration to suggest these seemingly mundane tasks facilitated a quiet exchange of ideas, a slow but steady diffusion of cultural practices across borders. It's easy to imagine that these interactions were solely about textiles, but the exchange likely extended beyond mere cloth. Consider the dyes themselves. Some originated far south, along the Red Sea trade routes, bringing with them knowledge of plants and extraction techniques unknown in Deir el-Medina. Perhaps a laundry worker noticed a particular shade of indigo not previously seen, prompting inquiries that eventually led to experimentation with local flora. Or perhaps a merchant mentioned a new method for softening linen used in a distant city, a technique quickly adopted by the village's skilled launderers. These seemingly insignificant details accumulated over time, contributing to a gradual evolution of craft practices within the community. The letters and ostraka recovered from Deir el-Medina reveal that workers frequently copied texts, not just literary works, but also practical manuals detailing various skills. It's plausible that some of these copies included observations gleaned from interactions with foreign traders regarding textile processing or dyeing methods. The texts recovered from Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans and laborers working on royal tombs, offer an unusual glimpse into daily life, far beyond grand pronouncements or monumental construction. Among these fragments are laundry lists, alongside love songs and census records. We often think of ancient Egypt through the lens of pharaohs and pyramids, but it's in these mundane details that we find a more intimate understanding of the people who built that world. And within those everyday routines, the work of laundering textiles played a surprisingly significant role, not just in keeping clothes clean, but also in shaping broader craft practices. Imagine the sheer volume of linen required to outfit a royal household, let alone the workers themselves. These weren't simply garments, they were status symbols and essential tools for labor. Maintaining that fabric demanded constant attention, washing, bleaching, repairing. The launderers of Deir el-Medina held a position of quiet importance within the community. Their tasks extended beyond mere cleaning. They became intimately familiar with the properties of different fibers, the effects of various treatments. It's reasonable to assume that through repeated observation, noticing how certain plants yielded brighter colors or specific methods softened linen more effectively, these workers accumulated a wealth of practical knowledge. This wasn't formalized apprenticeship, it was experiential learning passed down within families and workshops. Perhaps a young boy, assisting his mother with the washing, would notice a particular technique for removing stubborn stains. Or a woman might experiment with different combinations of herbs to achieve a more vibrant shade of red. These small innovations, repeated across generations, gradually refined textile production techniques beyond the purely functional. This accumulation of practical knowledge likely influenced how textiles were handled and improved upon. The texts from Deir el-Medina offer glimpses into this world. Records of rations, complaints about quality, even disputes over fabric. Discussions arising from these situations would have fostered further experimentation. A worker noting unevenly bleached linen might share observations with colleagues, leading to adjustments in soaking or sunning techniques. Or perhaps an artisan attempting a new dye combination would consult with launderers familiar with color fastness and fabric compatibility. The very act of repeatedly assessing textiles for damage, identifying weak points needing repair, undoubtedly contributed to a deeper understanding of their structure and potential vulnerabilities. It's not a stretch to suggest that this constant interaction between those producing, cleaning, and using linen created an informal network of expertise, subtly shaping the evolution of textile practices across the community. The linen itself reveals much about ancient Egyptian society. It served as currency, a status symbol, and an essential element of religious ritual.
And behind every finely woven garment, every shroud prepared for burial, were individuals whose contributions, often overlooked in accounts of pharaohs and pyramids, were vital to daily life. The sheer volume of texts recovered from Deir el-Medina offers a remarkable glimpse into their world. Records of rations, complaints about quality, even disputes over fabric, demonstrate that these weren't anonymous laborers but people with concerns and opinions. Imagine the collective effort required to process the linen used by an entire community. Soaking, scrubbing, bleaching in the sun, a relentless cycle dictated by seasons and need.
It's easy to picture this as monotonous work, yet consider what that repetition fostered. Discussions arising from these situations would have prompted experimentation. A worker noting unevenly bleached linen might share observations with colleagues, leading to adjustments in technique. Beyond the practicalities of cleaning, there was an inherent understanding of the material itself. An artisan seeking new dye combinations would consult launderers familiar with color fastness and fabric compatibility. The repeated assessment of textiles for damage, identifying weak points needing repair, likely contributed to a deeper understanding of their structure. This constant interaction between those producing, cleaning, and using linen seems to have created an informal network of expertise, subtly shaping textile practices across the community. While we lack detailed administrative documents specifically from laundry workers, the existence of ration lists and records of disputes suggests that their activities were integrated into larger economic frameworks. Those very disputes reveal a level of agency. These weren't passive recipients, but individuals capable of voicing concerns and negotiating terms. The knowledge held within this workforce extended beyond cleaning techniques. The ability to identify different types of linen, its weave, Imagine a scribe requesting specific cloth for a ceremonial garment. The launderer's expertise in distinguishing fine grades from coarser varieties would be crucial. This practical understanding likely informed broader textile production over time. It's reasonable to suggest that this collective experience formed a valuable resource for the entire community, though largely unacknowledged.